I mean, it's a conversation at the end of the day, shifting the conversation around the South African cricket team and that narrative that exists.
These type of conversations are happening in casual commentary at braais, at home, with people that are just watching the game and those sort of things. And we're wanting to do nothing different than having that same sort of conversation, perhaps just lift the lid somewhat, lift the caliber of the conversation, because we've already peeked behind the curtains or under the covers, if you want to use that term, right?
As soon as you get clear on your motivations and your purpose and your intention, a lot of things can start falling into place.
Yeah.
A lot of things become automated. A lot of things all of a sudden goes, oh, okay, cool, that's how I'm going to do it. So the hows become very clear when the whys are clear.
These guys are hopeful that they're winners. They're not seeing themselves as winners entering it. Despite their having illustrious careers, it's a matter of coming together under the Proteas brand is where things come unstuck in a way.
So the identities of our local cricketing ecosystem has been completely eradicated at a provincial level. There is no longer that sort of, oh, I want to play for this team. Yeah.
It's like taking someone that's not familiar or not comfortable or used to being free and not shown how to handle that freedom. It's the same sort of analogy when we start talking about a playing philosophy of playing with freedom.
All exciting stuff that we're going to get into, right? All exciting stuff that we're going to get into. I'm already salivating a little bit. So we're back here at it, Russel and myself. Really excited about today's conversation. So if you guys are not aware, you can scroll up on the playlist on YouTube or sort of scroll down on the podcast a little bit. Russel and myself had a conversation which was triggered really by one of the first articles that came out in terms of the Cricket World Cup. That South Africa only selected one Black African, was sort of the headline of that article, and we named our podcast along similar lines. Obviously put that out there for people to listen to, and then Nkululeko Serame, who's with us here today, more commonly known as Mafinks, has decided he also wants to contribute to that conversation, and in the name and in the spirit of hearing everyone's voices, providing everyone a platform to speak, Russel and myself thought it brilliant to have him on. So Mafinks, welcome and thanks for joining me and Russel. I'm sure and I'm aware that you've listened to the previous podcast, and both Russel and myself really just want to hear your voice, right? And what it is that you want to contribute to this discussion that's at times rampant at nets, in living rooms, casual conversations around braais, the conversation around the race politics within our country and how that applies to cricket in particular.
Fantastic. Good morning, guys. I know in South Africa it's afternoon now, so afternoon, Russel. So yes, Jody, that's right. I listened to the podcast. I've been watching every episode, even the one that came out yesterday. I've been watching that. I've been following cricket closely. I'm in the Bahamas now, but I think as usual, home is home. So you'll always have an interest. I mean, even now with the elections, I'm watching closely what's happening on TV. And very provocative, title for the article that came out. And then I could see that even with the podcast, it spurred what people would say is clickbaiting sort of thing. But I thought it was necessary, So it made me think of a number of things, because even here in the Bahamas, I was asked that, look, are Black people the majority in South Africa, or are you guys just a minority, like in the United States? And I told them, no, actually, Black people amount to what is almost, let's say, 80% of the population. And they asked me, what's going on? Do you guys not want to play cricket or whatnot? And I told them that, look, no, structurally something is still not, in a right place, because the people here know the history of South Africa in a way, a number of them. So they're saying to me that, look, but you guys have been 30 years out of apartheid, so what's going on? And when I look at the debate that happens back home, I looked at the squad that was, released for the World Cup, and I can't say any of those guys shouldn't be there. I actually think that if you had to look at statistics, because remember, I'm a coach myself, so if I was coaching in a system and those were the players doing well in South Africa right now, I would say, look, those are my best big hitters. These are my quickest bowlers, blah, 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 blah. So my thing is that if all of us in South Africa were Black, that squad would probably be exactly like how it is now, So if we didn't have the race politics. So sadly for us in South Africa is that our relationship is almost kind of like it's overshadowed or haunted by race because of the past, But in that past, the narrative didn't say that everybody was good enough. So we know with the D'Oliveira incident, Basil D'Oliveira, which meant that if you lived in apartheid South Africa and you were as good as Rabada, who at some point was the #1 test bowler in the world, you wouldn't even be playing first-class cricket, I think that's what a lot of the times from the white society, young people don't really understand where we come from, So when you look at trying to do justice, whether it's from the Holocaust in Europe, and now we need to do reparations for the Jewish community after the Second World War and the Holocaust, South Africa itself went through what the United Nations said was a crime against humanity, which was apartheid. And often when we think of a crime against humanity, we want to think about how many bodies died. So we were likely to say, look, there were 5 million Jews. And that's what de Klerk probably meant when he said that, this wasn't really a crime against humanity. It was just separate development. And that was very much a lie. So it wasn't just separate development. It wasn't people who all agreed that look, we're going to develop separately. It was a people who have colonized the people, because that's where South Africa comes from, who developed at the expense of those who they colonized, So it wasn't just people who mutually agreed. So that's the reality if we look at it from the social sciences perspective. Now the difficulties after 1994, how do we get it right? And my critique to government of South Africa, not just in cricket, is when you say that you are rebuilding a country, the first thing you do is that you give your people capacity, all of them. You give everyone capacity. So how do you build a nation, right? You're going to need engineers, you're going to need pilots, you're going to need business people, you're going to need farmers, you're going to need teachers, soldiers, police, blah, 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 right? It's no different in cricket. Cricket is no different. If we're saying that cricket is one of our national sports, that means that we're going to need cricketers, but we're also going to need the teachers for the cricketers. Just like if we need engineers, we're going to need teachers from grade 0 to PhD level. We're going to need lecturers, exactly. See? So Rob Walter made a very correct statement. He said that, look, he agrees with CSA. Transformation hasn't reached what we expected it to be. But he made a statement saying that, look, the system needs to get it right. And what he meant by that is that who are the people coaching you in this metaphorical cricket curriculum from grade 0? And let's assume that when you get to international level, you are a master student in cricket. And at first class level, you are an honor student in cricket, right? And then at under 19 level, we can say that now you are doing your bachelor's of cricket. And then in high school, you are finishing matric, or something like that. So who are the people teaching cricket? So let's think of it in the education curriculum. The university can only produce students as good as what they were taught up to matric. If you weren't taught well up to matric, you probably are going to struggle at first year at university. And if you weren't taught well at first year, you're probably going to struggle at second year. It's no different. So I looked at it as, because now we're intertwining this sport with the politics. The apartheid government created what is known. I mean, I'm a lawyer myself, so I know these things. The Group Areas Act. So the Group Areas Act said that yourself as Jody, you are a white person, and then Russel is a colored person, and then myself, I'm a black person. So according to the Group Areas Act, even if all three of us were good mates and we all earned the same salary and we could afford the same house in the same neighborhood, the Group Areas Act said no. It said that Jody should live in wherever, let's say in Kenilworth or in Camps Bay, even if we can all afford a house in Camps Bay. And Russel should live maybe in Mitchell's Plain or wherever, and that I should live only in Langa or in Khayelitsha. But those weren't just random neighborhoods. They were neighborhoods that had what they call the Separation of Amenities Act in apartheid. So that meant that Kenilworth or Camps Bay had a swimming pool, a public swimming pool. It had a park where kids could play. It had cricket facilities. And then it means that if I went to Russell's neighborhood in Mitchell's Plain, suddenly the quality of that stuff went down. And then if I went to Khayelitsha or Langa, it was even worse, including the housing. So everything about apartheid was designed to keep this hierarchy, And I think the challenge for all of us now as South Africans, if we're all agreeing now in 1994 that we want to all be one nation, is that we failed at having the same empathy to saying that, look, given this history, what are we going to do to fix this kind of thing, So part of it is that going further forward, I looked at the SJN. Somebody came and said, look, cricket alone can't solve those problems. So that means that the Ministry of Sport, this is now the government, the politicians, need to build cricket facilities close to where the people stay that they're trying to reach out to expand this cricket to. But it also means that facilities alone are not enough. You are also going to need very good coaches. And then from very good coaches and having good players, the selection policy will look after itself. So think of a book titled The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh is a coach in the NFL. He coached Chicago Bear, in the NFL. His philosophy was that the processes they've done during the week for training has prepared the team for the Saturday game. So he said that if he wanted to, he could drink himself to a pulp and sleep the whole morning when the team is playing a match, because the score will take care of itself. He's prepared each player so well that they are ready. That's why he won so many titles. So now I looked at the hub system, because remember again, South Africa's, the hubs are not just a hub. They are the hubs that, according to the Group Areas Act, they are in Russell's neighborhood and my neighborhood to try to build cricket there. There are no hubs in Camps Bay or in Sandton. So the cricket hubs are for the Black and the colored communities. Now I'm saying that let's compare that to a so-called township school. What is the quality of facility? What is the quality of education? Because coaching is education. So unless if I saw, let's say whoever, the best franchise coach, would he be interested in coaching in an academy in the township? In Langa or Khayelitsha or whatever. I think if we cared for the cricket there, it would show how much money we're investing in it. Accountants always say that if you want to see what a person values, look at where they spend their money. So the salaries and the minimum requirements of the level 1 or level 2 for the hub coaches suggest to me that we're not trying to make the players in the hubs to be as good as those players in the World Cup squad. So those who don't understand it think that, okay, look, what's happening? Why don't we have more black faces in the World Cup squad? And they are saying, but this is racist. But the people who are saying, no, but look at the stats, that's not racism. Those guys are, the word that is used often is merit, right? That this is selection on merit. So the racism is not only when somebody calls me a K word. When we speak of structural racism, we are saying that the parents in the township don't earn the same money. So a lot of them, there was a job reservation act, for example, in apartheid. So that means that my mother and my father were not allowed to become doctors or accountants or lawyers in the Republic of South Africa, So if we assume that they are like Ngaba Peter's mother, a domestic worker or whatever, they are paid cheaply, because let's be honest, our domestic workers are black people and we pay them very cheaply. It means even if their son was talented, they wouldn't afford, or their daughter, the private coaching that allows them to accelerate. They will have to rely on the public sector, which is what happens in the hub. Again, I'm intertwining the political language, the cricket language. So when we hear of the government sector in South Africa, we think of the black people sector. And when we hear private sector, we think of white people, that they are going to save Eskom. Let's privatize. So if you think of private security, whenever South African police service is not working out, the people in the suburbs just get private security. If the government school is over congested with too many students, blah, 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 you just take your kids to a private school. If the public hospital isn't working out, you just take them to a private hospital. So privatization, or the private sector in South Africa, not everybody can afford it. And if you look at the economists will tell you we are the most unequal society in the world. And that disparity between the haves and the have-nots is not like in France before the French revolutions, where the haves and the have-nots were white. There were the aristocrats, the bourgeoisie, and then there were the sans-culottes in the French Revolution, which were those who couldn't afford clothes, the garments that touched the ground, the garments were above the knees, So in South Africa, the disparity between the haves and the have-nots financially, economically, yes, there might be a few greedy politicians who are, corrupt, that earn billions or millions. But in the main, a lot of the black people, the same people that suffered from those laws that I mentioned earlier, cannot afford to privatize cricket. So they only rely on the hubs, which is the public sector. But we know that even what CSA spends to hire on coaches at the hubs is really something that no franchise coach would accept that salary. If we're assuming that the franchise coaches are the best coaches in the country, you know. So I think that structure is what's making Rob Walter say, look, something is wrong here, because what that structure does is that it makes a situation where pound for pound, if you look at stats, there was an article written now about black African batters being a problem in domestic cricket. It means that pound for pound, if we look at stats, we are going to find a situation where our most performing players are probably the ones who come from the backgrounds of white people. And the black guys will be maybe the Rabada, maybe the Bavuma, maybe so and so, in a country where the black people are 40 million out of 60 million. Something is wrong there. And it's not scientific for those who want to believe that, look, black people, according to Darwinianism or whatever it is, Darwin's theory, that these people are not real human beings. They evolved from apes. No, it can't be true. Otherwise, if it was scientific, because science means that it should be true across time, space, and culture, right? Like gravity. If it was true scientifically, why did South Africa lose 3 out of 3 games to the West Indies recently? But also, why were the West Indians the best? But also, if you look at Kolkata Knight Riders now, Andre Russell was one of the top performers. He's not a white guy. Brian Lara scored a 400. He scored a 500 in a first-class game and 400 in a test match. He's not white. So you know, that obviously should have been telling us that, but these black people in South Africa are just as black as the ones in the Caribbean. So it means there's something we're doing in terms of nature versus nurture. How we nurturing them, yes. So sorry for being too long, but that's just what inspired me to come and speak on your program. Thanks.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you for being here and your willingness, right? Because I think you raise a whole bunch of points that would be great to unpack and great to get deeper into, you know. Russel, I notice you have something that you're chomping at the bit for, so fire away.
Thanks, Advocate. Yeah, just thanks for the whole. We didn't really want to interrupt you at all because it was such a, you know, insightful share in a sense, right? So the thing that stemmed up for me was the backdrop of what you shared. In particular, I think the fact that a lot of people from both sectors, all colors, all classes, all backgrounds, tends to become disillusioned about what we're actually contending with, right? And as a result of it, I think, particularly if there are certain policies that's put in place, because remember, as you said earlier, the apartheid structures that were implemented was legalized, it was formalized, and it's great to have a legal mind in you being with us, right? When you took and abolished that legal structure, which you, as you said, it was a crime against humanity, and you kind of just dismantled it, the residue of that still continued, right? And therefore, you cannot therefore assume that just because we abolished the legal side of it, that the spirit of which that thing came about and the impact of it over time has dissipated. So for the most part, people become disillusioned for different reasons because they're not seeing the bigger picture, the deeper sense of what's unfolding. And as a result of it, when certain further policies now get implemented in our new structures as a way to create reparations or changing or trying to resolve or salvage some form of new way of doing things, if that is done in a disingenuous spirit, and it's not actually affecting us holistically to move forward as a society, as a cricket community, and as a society, that for me is more of a problematic scenario because we are trying to address something, but not at its root cause. So when you abolish the legal side or the laws, or you change the laws, but you still have an inkling to perpetuate the same old things that have come through and create more hurt on others without knowing or out consciousness, and you kind of dismisses of it. That for me is I think an important thing to look into. And I think you once shared it with me as well, and with our conversation prior to this, is this whole concept of fear and the loving aspect of you know, that reference, which can address some of the resolution strategies as we're trying to implement a new spirit in which we engage with each other. Can you maybe kind of speak into that for a bit?
Okay, Russ, thanks. Yes, so I did touch on when we spoke, you know, offline, about how South Africa's society, so I'm moving away from law now, I might get a bit more into philosophy, right? Is we live in South Africa with two polarities. On the one side is fear, and the one side is love. So those polarities are seen in every aspect of life. So how we build our homes compared to the UK, we have these high walls and electric fences. So this suggests we are fortifying ourselves. In fact, there are forts, Van Riebeeck's castle, the old fort in Natal, all these forts. So it shows Fort Beaufort in the Eastern Cape. So these are places where people lived in fear because people who have forts are trying to create what in Afrikaans is said a lager, So we are people who almost every aspect of our life is sponsored by fear. And I'll tell you why. When the players play, they fear what the coach is going to think if they don't perform. The coach fears that if the team doesn't win, his contract is on the line, Some coaches fear that if they coach someone else really well, that guy is going to take their son's spot in the provincial team, So there's a lot of fear. But remember, fear and love are two. They are energy. Fear is energy and love is energy, right? So fear is an energy that contracts, but love is an energy that expands. So if we lived more out of love, so in other words, if our actions, our thoughts, our intentions are sponsored by love, that would be different. Because love is expanding, love would say that, look, I've got such a high self-esteem that even if I coached everybody in South Africa equally and they were all good, I would still get the job as a coach, whether I'm white or black. I mean, Rob Walter is white. He's coaching the highest team in the country, that sort of stuff. So if we lived out of love, we would now contrast that with fear. So now I'm playing in the World Cup, not out of fear of choking, but because I love my country, I love my people, I love the brand, I love the team. You see, I'm going to school or university not because I fear to not have a job. I'm going there because I love education, I love learning. Does that make sense? Yes. You are going to church or to the mosque not because you fear going to hell, but because you love God. That's a different energy. That's a different motivation. You understand? So it's similar to when you say that, look, are we playing to win, which is sponsored by fear? Or are we playing as winners, which is sponsored by love? So now can you see the difference? But now remember something. People will play cricket in a way that they live their lives. You see? So if you look at the Indian community, in India, it's a tough world. There's 1.4 billion people. A lot of the players in the interviews, they speak about working hard. They speak about sacrifices they made, moving from one city to the other, to an academy, staying behind somebody's shop, because opportunities, you are easily replaced. Dinesh Karthik could have easily played, but Mahendra Singh Dhoni was there, Amit Mishra and those guys, Murali Karthik, could have played, but Anil Kumble was there, and then Harbhajan Singh came, So there's high competition there. You know what I'm saying? In the Caribbean, there's a thing of let's be cool, man. Let's enjoy ourselves. Let's just attack. Attack. That's what the guys say here. So they live life in a laid-back way. That's why the way they play is laid-back. So people play in a way that reflects how they live. So because of the field, because remember, when you are a champion, you are a champion 365 days of the year. Not only when it's match day, but after that, you're not living like a champion, So it's about living life holistically. So it's like almost like, is every aspect of our life sponsored by fear or is it sponsored by love? So do the companies in our country love cricket? Do they love investing in society? Or do they fear that, okay, look, if the color of the people who are running Cricket South Africa changes, maybe there's going to be corruption. So now we are pulling out. We can't keep sponsoring this, because ironically, Cricket South Africa had more sponsors the time before the SJN. And the SJN was addressing that there was a lot of bias and all these inequalities before the SJN arrived. But after the SJN, there are less sponsors. You see what I'm saying? So again, that is motivated by fear. So I apply that strategy even to the team that, look, are you playing there out of fear of losing your wicket or out of fear of losing when I coach the national team here? Or are you playing out of love for your teammates, out of love for the country? Therefore, the result doesn't matter. If I'm willing to go to a battle, I'll never back down from a battle. And I'm even willing to die in a battle. That's a different story, but I will never back down from a battle. because I love my teammates. I love what we represent. That's different, you know. So therefore, when we come back from a tournament, we don't say, well, I'm going to county cricket because you didn't give me a chance to play. You selected Russel in the semi-final of the World Cup. No, because all of us, including Russel, we are playing out of love, not out of fear. You see? So that's why I contrasted the fear and the love. Everything in South Africa is sponsored by fear. But the change will come when we overturn that and use the expanding energy of love. Thanks.
Yeah, just to counter that. So, I mean, what's nice is that you, sorry, Jody, if I just jump in again.
All good, all good,
yeah.
all good. I'm making my notes here.
Yeah, so what I like about the whole concept about fear and love is it seems like it can be, you can use the metaphor of fire, right? And I love the fact that you in the West Indies right now, you're up there in Bahamas, right? The fact that the West Indies are associated with this fire concept as well, because they speak about fire in a unique way with Fire in Babylon with their documentary. And if you think about, obviously, the Proteas, Protea fire, it's speaking about a different fire, the kind of what's it called, regurgitation or emergence of rebirth or something like that after a burning, which again is almost like a reactive type of thing. And I think that's where Jody kind of has a pushback on. But if you look at about in terms of what you just shared now, if it's a fire in the inside of your belly, a fire for love or a fire for resistance or a kind of overcoming thing, right? Those two fires seem to be contrasting. The fire that Fire in Babylon represents, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you can echo it differently with your sentiments. For me, it seems that that fire is coming from a deeper space, from a space where they were playing for a grander cause, and that fire drove them to actually collaborate and find ways to combat and achieve and overcome whatever is the resistance that they were, whether it's a physical opposition on the field or a bigger cause off the field that they were standing for, right? And the documentary says it plainly. And I like this funny, humorous analogy. If it's, you would say it even in their lingo right now. If it's too hot, the pace is real hot. I think that's how they say it. So they refer to that fire also the fire in the belly, and it manifests into quite aggressive language, but they were never verbal or vocal about it. Where our kind of fire comes through in a different way. It seems almost like it's a pseudo aggression, a pseudo kind of anxiety that we're imposing on another. And we spoke about this before. Maybe you can speak into that because you are currently there, and what you picked up from that versus ours.
Yes, so you are right, Russell. So here, in this part of the world, because it's small islands, they actually are forced to unite, whether they're doing trade as CARICOM or whether they are doing other things. Like right now, there's some other movements that they are looking to do to gain reparations from the British for their slavery, right? So even geographically, the West Indies itself is not just one nation. It's Guyana in the northeast of South America, and then the Windward Islands, which is the southern chain of the Antilles, then Trinidad, Barbados, the Leeward Islands is the northern chain of the Antilles, and then Jamaica, right? So even here in the Caribbean, they actually use their different strengths to come together. So actually, to many people's surprise, Jamaicans are very aggressive people, So Jamaicans even have a sharp tongue. They will tell you stuff. They're very aggressive. That's why they say in Jamaica, they say we little but we talawa. We are little but we've got talawa, So we are small but we've got a heart. So Jamaicans are known to be quite aggressive. But then when you go to Barbados, which is very much more British, the Bajans pride themselves even off the field with their education, and the Trinidadians. If you think of the best scholars, the CLR James and those guys, So if you go to Barbados, they pride themselves on being more like cerebral. So their style of play is that I don't just give my wicket away. I play traditional test cricket. That's why their best test cricketers are from Barbados. But their most aggressive cricketers are from Jamaica. And up until recently, if you look at people like Alzari Joseph, the guys from the Leeward Islands, they hardly smile, And there was a rumor, there was a folklore in the Caribbean that the most rebellious slaves that came from Africa, if they were too rebellious, they would be sent to Antigua where it's drier, where you have to harvest water just to punish them, to teach them a lesson, like they're kind of like a Robben Island. So they say that's why the people in Antigua have this tough demeanor. They hardly smile. Viv Richards hardly smiled, He would just come on and have that demeanor, So they are capable of actually uniting their strengths. Because when you look at it, I was listening to what you guys were speaking about yesterday of leadership. And I always told people that, look, there are two types of captains, leaders in cricket. There's the technical leader, which I think Jody touched on. That's somebody who's got he will know when to make a bowling change. He will know when to do this, when to do that. And then there's somebody who's a good social leader. That's the guy who knows, who can sense that the team is a bit too anxious. I need to calm them down. Or the team seems a bit too complacent. I need to remind them that, guys, don't be too complacent. We are getting into the space of ego, So compare that to, let's take Steve Smith or Virat Kohli or whatever. They come across as a good technical leader. They'll get you the results. They'll know when to bring on a change and whatnot. But Rohit Sharma comes across as a good social leader. He knows how to get the team to, he's a very calm demeanor type of guy. I think Mahendra Singh Dhoni had a bit of both. He knew exactly what to do, who to bring on as a change. But at the same time, he was a good social leader. A lot of the Indian players, when I listen to the interviews, they thank him a lot for their development as human beings, So the same thing, that if you think of that analogy, it's the same in the West Indies. The people from different islands have different styles of playing, but when they come together, they know how to use it really well, So that's the strength here. That's how they use their fire in Babylon. Because even in fire in Babylon, it was at a time where, remember, these countries gained independence just in the 50s, 1950s, just after the Second World War, some of them the 60s. That's when they gained independence. You see, a lot of the countries in the Caribbean. So at that time, like what one of the men say in Fine Babylon, that they were born in colonial times and grew up in independence times. So they wanted to assert themselves as a new nation. They wanted to show that, look, we belong in the world stage. So someone like myself, who's born in 1987, because apartheid is no different, it's just a form of colonialism. I was born in colonial times, but I grew up most of my life in independence time after 1994. That's when Black people had a right to self-determination. That's what independence is. It's not about whether it's some other country onto So in a way, I could also say that I was born in colonial times in South Africa, and I'm growing up in independence time, But if we still bring the same undercurrents to the new fire of the independence time, we're gonna be contradicting ourselves. We're gonna still see that there's no results. So we need to make ourselves more in line with the fire, be authentic, and not to live in, what I mentioned as infidelity. We've broken our vows to each other as a nation. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. It's been interesting sitting here and just listening to both of you. So maybe just give me a moment, right? So one of the things, and I might just rewind sort of through parts of the conversation as it's been happening. So one of the things that I appreciate you for bringing into the conversation, Mafinks, is because I think Russel and I alluded maybe to it, or I kept on thinking, but a lot of this has to do with government, right? And so I don't know if Russel and I brought the political angle in as much. Maybe it's because we're not so clued up on it, right? Maybe it's because it's not our forte. But I had the sense that it does play a part, right? Whoever sets the frame governs the game. And so a lot of our frames within cricket gets set by government policies, etc., etc. And I'll be honest, I'm not clued up with those things, right? I really don't know them that well. And I would hazard a guess that most South Africans don't, right? So, and I know I can't speak for everyone. It's just my sense. And so I appreciate you for bringing that into the conversation, because we're fighting then potentially like an invisible battle, right? Because we want to potentially make change. We want to potentially have things different, but there's big cogs sort of in place in this machine that potentially stops that from happening, right? So I wonder at times how many of CSA's policies would CSA want different, but they can't, because there's a system above them that governs them and says this is how it's got to be. We don't know, right? That's a question that sort of hangs in the air. So we could potentially point the finger at CSA quite a lot, but maybe their hands are also cut off when it comes to certain things. And I think that's something that needs to be considered at least as part of this conversation. Is that effect of the uniqueness of our country and sort of the history and where we've come from and where all those things are positioned, And so from that, you sort of led into the quality of coaches, which I certainly think that we can touch on a little bit more. In particular, I want to reference maybe just a part of Russel in my conversation, or it wasn't part of my and Russell conversation. It was a conversation I had with somebody afterwards, right? After the first podcast came out, and sort of what he indicated was that I don't know why he stays out in the East Rand in Johannesburg, and he was sort of saying, well, we've got Itwatwa Primary School down the road from us, right? They have no facilities. They don't have any male teachers. The coaches there aren't of any good quality. And I said to him, but that's part of the problem, is that we keep spinning the circle in South Africa that excellence can't come out of Itwatwa. And so we're not telling a story of inspiration that says in places like Itwatwa, and I will be honest, I don't know what it's like there. I can only imagine, right? That something good can come out of that. Excellence can only come out of the Cares, the Jeppy, the Sinstithians, the Michael House, the Hiltons, and so we want to take a kid that shows a bit of talent out of Itwatwa. The coach in Itwatwa can't ever believe that he can build anything because the messaging is consistently like, when you're there, you're not good enough. And so as a coach, I can imagine that I don't feel any inspiration to think even that, hey, I can go to a primary school like that. I can go try and find funding. I can try and start building something here. I can try and expand something within my community. I don't think that thinking really exists as a generalization, because the story says you've got to go somewhere else. You've got to go into that place that was maybe previously white, right? Maybe the schools don't look that anymore, but it's sort of it's the hub of excellence is still that place. Yet we have these stories, which I've learned in these conversations, because in my mind it was always Mackay and Tini, and Russell's educated me nicely that Paul Adams is similar and Ashwell Prince is similar, and I think you mentioned one other name in our conversation, which I forget. But you sort of referenced Ngaba Peter, who maybe has a similar sort of story. I saw his capping ceremony thing on Instagram yesterday, and basically I think Quentin de Kock gave him his cap it's on Instagram. So, and he basically says, 14 months ago, you were a net bowler to us, and look at where you are now, right? And so I think we don't tell these stories enough. And we don't allow them to shift the narrative. There are these examples of how you can come from outside the system and be excellent. And so to me, that's an important part of this conversation. It's an important point I'm hoping that we can start getting across through these conversations to all the people listening, is that it is a new mindset. It's a mind shift to say, it shouldn't be a color of the skin thing. Like you said, black people aren't human, Yet you go look around the world. And I personally, I'm not a fan of the words black excellence, but I think through these conversations, I can see where it's come from and where language like that's positioned. It's sort of, initially I just had an aversion to it. I think I have a little bit of an understanding through these conversations that the black community sort of latches onto words like that because it feels it's up against this fight of the white excellence, where really that shouldn't be the debate. Skill is skill to me. And I don't think we should ever discount where people come from, and think we should discount people's stories. But like you rightly say, that if we had to pick the best cricket team in our country at this point in time, it is the team maybe that sits at the World Cup, that doesn't have representation across the board. And I don't think we should be so short-sighted, and I think I've said this before, as saying, well, 80% of our population is Black African, therefore 80% of our teams must be Black African. I don't think we must be that short-sighted, because excellence can live and breathe in many different ways. I personally would feel like we're 30 years down the line, if we could have picked a cricket team right now and there's 3 Black Africans that are like, we adore them and we think they're the greatest, and there's 4 or 5, 3 players of color, and then the vast majority might still be white, right? Because it is a process. It isn't something that's going to change overnight. But if we could do that and pick it with that same ethos of this is the best, then I think we've come a ways, right? And I feel like we must probably be busy with the right stuff, right? That in, say, another 10 years, there's maybe 5 of each color, and maybe in a couple, and then as we go, and maybe like in 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, maybe it is 80%, right? So I'm not oblivious to the fact that change takes time, but I feel like we've dropped the ball in big ways over the last 30 years. That 30 years, in other words, kids that were born 30 years ago and could be international level sports stars today, that there's only one. that we can say is good enough, like really good enough to play in a team, I feel like we've dropped the ball, like personally, you know. And I say the I referencing every coach, me included, everybody that's part of the cricketing system, we've dropped the ball, right? That we haven't allowed cricketers to develop holistically in their areas, in their places. We keep this disparity between you've got to go there. And that school can't give sponsorship to everybody, you know? And that coach in the township can't start believing like, I can actually create international cricketers, you know, and I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to upskill myself to get myself to a place where I'm able to do that. Those dreams can't live because the dream can't happen in the township. It can only happen in that other place. I think I'm going to pause there for a moment. I've got some more, but I think that's maybe what's been relevant most to our conversations so far. Russel?
Finky, I'm not sure if you want to answer that. I just want to make one small addition to what Jody just said, and then you can respond. I think when we did this talk, which you obviously, you know, it got you thinking as well on the lines of what we were talking about and wanted to be a part of the conversation. We were looking at the title, and I'm being transparent here now. We were looking at the title, and I asked you what the reference point is of the quote, "Black child, you're on your own." And you kind of gave me a summation of where that's come from, right? But it does kind of allude to the fact that people have been, like I said earlier, completely disillusioned and disempowered, similar to what Jody's saying 30 years down the line. And we therefore still kind of call, and people are not understanding this dynamics, still calling for a white team that's now representative, you know, at the World Cup bid, wanting them to choke and fail. You know what I mean? And it feels like we only have one to choose, as Jody referenced, from all of this after 30 years. That's kind of an indictment on the current structure in which they have admitted that they failed. So I just want to kind of put that. You can maybe speak from different angles, what Jody just said, what I'm just adding on, and then speak into that as best as you can.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. I was listening very deeply to what Jody was saying, and he's right. You know, it's about a structure. So I want us to think of something, right? If we put into place proper systems and the kids are getting the same kind of coaching. So how did I become a lawyer? I had the same education as any other white guy in the country. In high school, I was on a bursary, and then I went to a university. That's what it takes to make a lawyer. Now, let's assume that the average lifespan of a South African is 60 years. How many years, you know, when you do a cricket South Africa coaching course or any other coaching course in the world, they speak of a long-term athlete development, LTAD, right? So in 30 years, let's take 30 years. Now, today, Black people are 40 million out of the 60 million that we've got, right? If we really invested properly into the system, and this is in every aspect of life, even educationally, right? If we invested into the system, by now we would have a situation where even if the team had 8 Black guys who are playing in the T20 World Cup squad, we would be able to see that they deserve that by the IPL also wanting them, you know? So look at which guys play in the IPL. Those are probably the guys who are going to be in your World Cup squad. And then there might be 1 or 2 that are unlucky to miss out, like Riza Hendricks didn't have an IPL contract, right? Maharaj got an IPL contract. Shamsi has been in the IPL. He's good enough to be in the IPL. Then you look at, so if you look at all those things, Lizard Williams didn't make the World Cup squad, but he's good enough to be in the IPL. Lungin Giri was in the IPL. Nandre Berger. So if we assume the IPL is the UEFA Champions League of cricket, it's like where the whole world meets to compete, just like in the UEFA Champions League. It would make sense that just like in soccer, most players from Chile or from Peru or from Uruguay probably play their soccer somewhere in Europe. There might be 1 or 2 that play in the local league, but their best players eventually get signed where there's the big money, isn't it? Same thing with the West Indies squad. People are saying Narayan should avail himself because if he comes, he's the missing link. That's what everybody's saying in this part of the world, you know? They're saying if only Narayan avails himself, that team, whatever happens, they'll be happy for it. But if they don't win the World Cup, they'll blame Sanil Narayan, you know? So the IPL will always be an indicator of how many of your guys are probably going to be in your World Cup squad. And then also the stats of the SA20, although that is still debatable because a lot of the people in the Black community in South Africa said that, wait, the SA20 is seen as the thing that prepares South African cricketers for international cricket. because they're going to play now against international competition. So if there's only 7 black guys there, remember, not all the white guys who played in the SA20 did very well in the SA20. Some of them had an ordinary tournament. So if you only have 7 black guys, it means that if 5 of them have an ordinary tournament and Ngaba, Peter, and 1 more do well, probably only those 2 might be in the World Cup squad. You see? So that's what I spoke about structurally. So that's quite correct. And I'll show you why it does matter. So in 30 years, we should have much more than 2 or 3 black guys who are good enough. Because if I took a group that is 13 years old and I worked with them with a high quality coaching for 10 years, by the time they're 23 years old, let's assume in every province there are 50 black guys that we've really identified the talent and we've worked with them. Let's assume that from each province there are 10 of them or 8 of them who eventually become world class. That's 8 times whatever. There used to be 11 provinces, Boerland, Northwest, blah, blah, blah. That should be almost 8 teams worth of black guys who can also perform the same as Rassie van der Dis and as Nandre Berger, as whatever. So there's a huge failure. You know, I'm saying these things sometimes because I'm a scholar of the social sciences. There's such a huge failure. I'll show you why I sometimes blame our entire political or governance system, you see, and our way of thinking. Do you know that I think in 2016, there were only 7 black pilots in South Africa since 1994, only 7, right? But 3 of them worked in the military's Air Force. So there were only 4 in the commercial flights. That meant that if all white pilots went on strike for 2 weeks, there would be no flights from Joburg to Cape Town. There wouldn't be enough pilots. You see? But if I go to England, if all the black pilots in England went on strike, there'll be more than enough white pilots. So it wouldn't disrupt the economy of the flights. And if I went to Saudi Arabia or to wherever, UAE, in Qatar, there are enough of their local pilots, so much that if 30% of them said that they're going on strike, things would still be efficient. You understand? So that is why, that's what people don't understand. If all white players in South Africa went on a call pack, we would have a squad that might even lose to Uganda. You understand what I'm saying? At least Uganda and Bangladesh, whether they win the World Cup or lose the World Cup is irrelevant. They know that they've done whatever they can with their limited resources to give access to every cricket player in the country and to upskill their coaches. And they're willing to live and die with the result. And I gave you guys an example of New Zealand, right? New Zealand's team doesn't have a black African player. They've also never won the World Cup. So there's no evidence to say that the more white your team is, the better the chance of winning the World Cup. You see? The truth is the more you have good coaches, you'll produce good players. And then you'll have a bigger pool to choose from. And even the IPL will probably have a bigger pool to choose from your own country. You know? So these things are very structural, and the only way to fix it, we need to be conscious of what we're doing. We can't expect it to happen accidentally. That, oh, accidentally a guy like Bavuma and Rabada emerged. It can't be accidental. It has to be planned. Just like you can't accidentally have a lawyer. The person must go through the schooling system, and at matric, they must meet the minimum requirements to enter into law. Then they must do first year, second year, third year, etc. You know? So the same thing should happen even in the cricketing field. Is we give capacity to people, nobody gets left behind. So much that if you don't make it, it must be your own fault. You mustn't come to an SJN and blame anyone, you know. So we do a lot more structurally, yes.
Yeah, I think you raise an important point there, which sort of behind the scenes have been shared in a couple of conversations between myself and other people. It is that exact thing, that if you take a white cricketer, right? If you think of the cricketing system within South Africa, in the white community, what would be spoken about between people amongst the braais, if you find yourself around a cricket braai, would be, and there's a couple of parents around where the kids are fairly good cricketers, they would speak in the following sort of way. They would say, you know what, my boy is under 16 this year. There's a national under 16 week at the end of the year. But you know what? My child's competing for 1 of 5 spots. Right? That's the reality. In a team of 13, in a squad of 13, my child's competing for 1 of 5 spots. Within that, they would sort of already be able to reason how many black Africans they need to be, how many of other color they need to be, and what are the potential skill sets of the good cricketers, you know, in those colors, in their age, because they know the age. They know the kids. They sit around the cricket fields weekend in, weekend out. They're there to support their kids. And so they would have a stance, and then they would say something like, well, my child's a batter, who bowls a little bit. So I really need to focus on their bowling because it should be something that they can bring as an extra skill to the party, maybe, because there's these 2 black African batters that'll make the team and they will bat in the top 6, right? So my child's competing for 1 of 4 spots. But you know what? There's these 2 white kids. One's a wicket keeper. He's the best wicket keeper in the age. And the other one, he's just smashing runs, right? And so my child might be like in a group of about 5 or 10 white kids, and I'm actually just competing for 2 spots. And so I'm sharing this because, one, it shows a little bit of the white mindset potentially towards these things, especially if you get like close to these sort of types of selections where you're in a team. But 2, I think it drives excellence, right, to a certain extent, because it's like I've got to be so good that I can get into a team where I'm competing for 2 spots. And so to a certain extent, and I can't speak completely for the other side because I'm not necessarily in conversations with a lot of black people talking about these things, right? That's part of why we have you here, is to hear the other voice, right? Is to be educated. But my stance at times is that, one, in the black community, there isn't all that parental support, one, right? And it might be the monetary side of things, as you've mentioned, right? There is that disparity. So the mom in the township, would rather go buy a loaf of bread than pay for extra cricket coaching, potentially, right? And so because of that, the disparity that exists, and because it can at times look like it's a handout still, even though definitely, certainly, there's enough players of color at lower levels, right? Of all colors, that are quality. There are enough 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds in our country of all color that is phenomenal. And so the question then for me becomes, what happens with that, right? Because it's not that they're not there like they were, say, in 1994, 95, when all these rules changed and you had to select 2 black Africans or 2 players of color in a cricket team, and they weren't good enough. They literally just weren't, right? That those not good enough things are dissipating at a rapid rate. It's no longer the case that at lower levels that black cricketers of all different varieties of black is not good enough. But it speaks to this idea that the white side in my head, there's a drive towards excellence, or there's an understanding towards that, right? Versus potentially, and I don't know, right, in the black communities, I don't know if parents operate in the same way. I don't know if parents thinking in the same way. Like, what school must I get my kid into, right? Versus, I'm just lucky to have gotten a bursary somewhere. The white parent will actually sit and contemplate and say, okay, cool, let's take my child to St. Stithians. I want to see if I can get him in there. Okay, no, it's a lot of money. So unless I get this type of bursary, we're not going to go to Saints. But let's also take him to Cares. Let's also take him to a Stain City. Let's also take him to a Trinity House or whatever it might be and see, right? So white parents are shopping their kids around. They're building their CVs. They put their stats in every year. What have my child scored? This is their average this year. This is their average this year. These are the games they've won. Yeah, he's been captain. They build cricket CVs for these kids. They shop them around. I don't know if that's happening within the colored communities, the black African colored communities within our country. And so I can still see how the system at the end of the day produces more white cricketers, right? And there is evidence for it. I've done the research. There's evidence for it, that just shows that disparity. And so I think unless we start, for me, it always comes down to, like, unless you start telling a different story, that the mom in the township knows about a Peter Gnaba and a Paul Adams, and that more can be done in those environments, unless parents are actually starting to take the initiative, unless coaches start believing, unless administrators at schools or principals at primary schools in townships saying, we're going to develop cricket here. I'm, as the principal, I want to cultivate the love for cricket at my school. Unless we get more of that happening, I see Russel has something to say, but I just want to add this one last thing in here, is that I always think if we had to really solve this problem, how do we solve it? And then what you do is you take, you give 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old black kids, colored kids, you give them the same as what white kids would get at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. So you give them, and maybe we can't give them all the same home, and there might always be that disparities. There's always the haves and the have-nots, but I think there's enough evidence that excellence doesn't just come from the haves; it comes out of the have-nots too. What I'm more talking about, you get 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds that go for private coaching. They're being exposed, right? They're being taught the game in different ways, and so you need to do that en masse for everybody. For every race, color, culture, religion, whatever it might be in the country, en masse, they must all get the same at that age, because that's the foundation, that's the grounding. And then you must be able to provide for them every step of the way in the same way. And if you do that, in 20 years from now, we'll have cricketers where we can pick 20 to 25 to maybe 30 years from now. You'll be able to pick a cricket team on merit, fully representative of our country. And so I think when you allude to systems, we must give them a proper system. That's where my head goes. I don't know if you have a different sort of thought on that, but that's where my head goes with it, to make it maybe a little bit more practical. That it is the quality, the consistency of education, knowledge, focus on a building of a relationship with a human being at a young age, to teach them the foundational stuff about how the game works, to expose them to games and matches, etc., through competition in the same way. And if you do that in time, you will produce cricketers. Yeah. Russell?
Yeah, thanks, Jody. I want to add something. It's just tiny. I think there's a different approach, and I'm going to speak into from the colored point of view, if for lack of a better way of saying it. The approach for excellence, and there has been tons of excellence, and it comes through through the different systems. It's also for black, by the way, because I've been exposed to both. But Mafinki, you can specifically speak into that areas. For the most part, the thing that you framed as an advantage in terms of building up CVs and driving that sense of competitiveness, preparing the kind of almost CVs for potential gigs, right? That leveled up excellence is one way to do it. That's definitely the case. But there is also a balance on that, in that the different approach from a colored point of view would always be community-based, right? It will always be from the space of our communities have come together. We had role models, like in all communities, but we had that as a backdrop. So we do, but that structures and setup that we once had was completely dismantled and abolished, and wasn't given any form of credence. So we don't have those role model figures in our communities. Instead, they are taken up and put into white structures now. So therefore, there's still a competition that happens amongst white people, despite those representations being different inside the team spaces. They still compete with each other. The only thing about competing, though, for, call it success, what you're not doing is you're not working for collaboration. So it's competition, but not co-creating. You're not creating community of excellence. You understand what I'm saying? So you're actually creating more polarization as a result of it, even amongst yourselves. You're kind of dispelling, like, oh no, he's going to get chosen. So he's I think you call it the golden boy or whatever. So that's going to happen. So competition in itself is not the driver of excellence. When you start co-creating and creating communities of excellence, now we're all finding ways to contribute towards excellence, and whoever stands out at the right time will then be picked. Now that, as I said, from a colors point of view and black, I know this to be true because we've dipped into those experiences firsthand, is that the communities drive the successes, but they've been mummed over the years through these systems. They've been mummed and completely taken and eradicated and felt like they have no. I think Mafinki referred to it as the vow of infidelity. What was vowed to us in terms of how we can approach it, well, we're living that fraudulent lie, and it plays itself out. Hence, there's not so much of a push to trying to get recognized because we don't have that support to kind of get us and keep us there, right? Because when we step into those other structures, we don't have a sense of belonging because everyone's competing with each other. It's like stepping into a family, and the family already has rankings, and certain kids already have privileges. So now we still have to stand in our way and wait for our chance, and that's never coming. So that's kind of the thing that's playing itself out. And for me, that also alludes to, I think we spoke about it yesterday in a way, that extra pressure that's mounting on you when you do get to accomplish or get to be chosen. Once you're there, the pressure to perform at that higher level is actually more crippling. Because remember, you were competing to get there, but that level of standard is far higher. It doesn't guarantee success because you're only competing with people who are way lower than you and still struggling with a whole bunch of other things. So now you're outshining those people who have an unfair advantage over. You had an unfair advantage over with the support you had. But when you come to the top, around the world, there's a different form of competition now. And that's when you have to stand your own. So the pressure is even worse. And I think we spoke about it yesterday, where the supposed white team that is now going to the World Cup will feel more under pressure to perform now, because we're saying what's going to happen when they now have to face this team solely on their own. So I'm bringing up 2 different or 3 different aspects there, but I just wanted to add that and hand over.
Yeah, just before my things go, I just appreciate your answer there, Russell, because as I was speaking and as you sort of started your reply, I had like a big epiphany for myself here, big awareness. And it essentially echoes everything that you just said, that because it's sort of like this conversation is starting to like create like little puzzle pieces that fits in the couple that we've had, right? And so I really hope that people are following along and hopefully they get similar. They hope maybe it's different, but their own. But for me, there's a connection between these ideas that of the raising of the individual, right? And now I just sort of in my own mind, as I was speaking, I was listening to what I'm saying because it's the reality, right? I've had many of these conversations with white parents, but it is the individual thing. I take care of my child, you know, and I want to make sure my child is taken care of, and it's very much driven along those similar lines, right? And so, as you started talking, I think you gave like a really cool example of what it, or you alluded to like a really cool idea of what it could rather be is like a community of excellence, not just individual excellence. And so if we think of, say, the Protea brand down the line, if it's a series of community excellences, right, that came together, and what I mean by that is not necessarily the black community and the white community, but it's the community of a club, the community of an area, which in our country is more and more, you know, more and more in certain parts where, you know, like white people and black people go to the same club, right? It is happening more and more, but if it's seen as a community of excellence, not as at a club potential, like, oh, we at least have some black representation at our club, you know, but more like we are this group of people and we're doing this together for the benefit of all of us. And it really comes from that place, from the inside out, not from the outside in, not because the chairman at the club has decided this is the way we're going to do this, you know, but that every single person in the club buys into it because it's a different DNA. It's a different way of being a South African. Then I think, like, I feel like then it can start working, right? And so I appreciate these conversations because I feel like this is the first time I've had like a real mind shift. At this point in time, up until this point in time, it's really just been sort of, okay, sharing my opinion, sharing my thoughts, sharing my ideas, maybe picking up little subtleties and nuances. But I feel like this for me has been a big shift because I'm the one saying the words, and at the same point in time, I'm having this realization that, oh, okay, but Jody, are you hearing yourself? Are you actually hearing what's happening here? And then you just literally came in and sort of reinforced the idea. So yeah, my thinks. Where's your head going with all of this?
Yeah,
What's
good. So I thought while you were speaking about what happens where you say, look, sometimes white parents look at it and think, you know what, there are only 5 spots in the team. That one has been scoring big runs. That one is the best fast bowler. That one is a good keeper. So my son might have 1 of 2 spots left. But because he bowls a bit, let me just work on the medium pace and get him to squeeze himself into the team. Can you see again that competition is motivated by fear? So you're going to practice your medium pace, not out of love for the team, out of love for the game, out of love for the province, but out of fear of not being picked. So can you see which kind of energy that is? You see, it's not a genuine energy. But here's the flip side of that coin. When I go back home, and because I'm probably one of the most successful people in my township in terms of cricket, right? There's another guy, an opening batsman called Nkululeko Serame. He played for Northwest Dragons. So he's also from my township. So when I go back home and I just have cricket conversations, people seem dejected. They say, oh, what's the use? we only fighting for 3 spots. At least if it was 5 spots, 2 more of us might have a better chance. But when I was playing for the Cape Cobras, this was 2019, I had a few conversations with a few of my mates, that used to play with me at university, and 1 or 2 of them went on to play for another franchise. And these were black guys, and I sat down with them and I said to them, look, do you know this franchise thing is actually the way things are being done is not going to help you to achieve excellence? And they said to me, what do you mean? I said, you're a black guy, you are signed by this team, whatever team it is, Leopards or whatever you want to call it, let's say you are signed by whatever, Tigers. And you know that, look, every game, a minimum of 3 of you have to play, but there's 4 of you signed in a squad. So all you need to do is to just make sure you are better than just one of the other 3 guys. But you're actually not actually improving yourself. You see? So all you need to do, your psychology is that, okay, I just need to be better than 1 more black guy. Then I'm going to be in the squad. But my way of thinking, because I always used to think like a coach, is that no, set your own standard. So for example, if you're a left arm spinner, the standard is Ravindra Jadeja or Ashwin or Nathan Lyon. That's the standard. The standard is not someone else in your team. You understand what I'm saying? If you're a batter and you are saying, okay, look, I just need to be better than there's 8 white guys in the trial, I just need to be better than 3 of them, then I'm going to be in the squad because they must pick 5. You think that you are doing well for yourself, but in reality, you are not. You are stunting your own growth because you lack self-esteem. You don't believe you can be as good as David Warner or as good as Tendulkar, who's not a white guy, or as good as Brian Lara, who's not a white guy. So you are actually lowering your own standards so much that you might do well in our domestic 4-day competition. And then when you get selected in the test side, it looks embarrassing to watch against New Zealand or whoever. And we're thinking, but these are our top performers in our domestic structure. So yes, we know the Proteas didn't send their best side to New Zealand. That is granted. And probably if New Zealand brought their second string side against the Proteas, they might come up against it, But I don't want Proteas or New Zealand for this conversation to be the standard. Let's take the Indian team. When they went to Australia, right? There was no Virat Kohli. Hanuma Vihari played, the guy from Hyderabad. So there was no Virat Kohli. There was 1 or 2 guys that were not there. I think they opened with Mayank Agarwal. So there wasn't a usual Rohit Sharma and Shikhar Dhawan and whatnot. Bumrah wasn't there. I think Mohammad Shami was injured. Hardik Pandya was injured. Shardul Thakur played, They played with Natarajan, the left-arm seamer from Tamil Nadu. So their squad, Washington Sundar came to play because Jadeja was injured. Remember, they beat Australia in that series. Those were the guys who were the top performer in 4-day cricket in India. Those were their guys who were next in line for the Indian team, So that's why I say I don't want New Zealand to be the standard, because if they're the standard, the truth is that if they also didn't have their main test side, we would bully them with our first test team, Now, if we want to be the best in the world, our thinking has to be the best in the world. The way we live, the way we coach, the way we empower people has to reflect that. It can't be that if you're coaching in the hub, I expect you to probably do the job of 10 coaches because there's a big population of players in the hub, but you're alone. And then on top of that, I pay you very poorly and I expect you to produce excellence. That doesn't make sense. The way I'm paying you itself doesn't show that I expect excellence from you. But I'm saying to you that, hey, I'm going to the Minister of Sport and saying, look, guys, we've got so many coaches doing this in the township. I think that's not fair even on those coaches. There's no solid investment. Now, let me paint you guys a picture why we have the worst Gini coefficient in the world. That's the gap between the rich and the poor, right? And earlier I mentioned that gap for us, unfortunately, it's also racial. With 1 or 2 black guys that are, that got shady deals or, this BEE stuff where I can just make you sign and that you are a director and I pay you a few crumbs and you go and live in Sandton, but I make most of the decisions. That's not really empowering you. But let me tell you something. The real unemployment rate in South Africa is about 40% of the population that is 18 and over are not working, right? Those who work, 70% of them earn not more than 6,000 Rand a month. So I want you to just close your eyes a bit and imagine what you could do for yourself and your wife and your 2 kids and the dog with 6,000 Rand a month. And when I say not more, I'm saying some of them might be earning 2,000 Rand a month. There's a building that collapsed now in George. They got illegal immigrants because there's a minimum wage in South Africa. See, there's a minimum wage. So those illegal immigrants were getting paid 90 Rand a day. I think that's immoral. It's unjust. So when we speak about crimes against humanity, we're not talking about how many bodies died. We're speaking about how many people's dreams are you killing. Because to be human means to have the opportunity or the potential for self-actualization. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We were taught that in school already, I think primary school. You see, that's part of being human. So I'm giving us this picture of South Africa to show us why government sector, businesses, CSA need to invest more money into equipping the coaches, giving them good facilities, and then giving them, paying them very well enough, but getting the best of the best coaches in those environments. You see, that's why I'm saying all these things. And then lastly, just to close off now, that's what inspired me 2 years ago to speak to a CEO in one of the provinces. So I was moving from Cape Town, going to back home, and I spoke to the guy who was the CEO. Then I said to him, look, you know what, I'm moving back from Cape Town, but I really love cricket. You know, I could just close shop in cricket and go and be a lawyer. I'll make a lot more money. I'll have less stress. I wouldn't need to have these conversations with anybody. I can just think about how much money is coming in every day. So I said to him that, look, I don't worry. I'm sure. I showed him my CV, everything. He can see I'm not desperate for a job in cricket, right? If anything, my family's been asking me, do you really think this is worth it? Leave this cricket thing. You are educated. Go and do something else. So I'm doing this out of passion, right? So I said to him, look, just get me a good facility in the township. Get me a good facility, an indoor facility. Get me outdoor nets. And then I will give me a responsibility. I must identify players. And then I must train the other coaches. Give us a budget where I pay those coaches well enough for them not to have any stress. And we will produce you good players in big numbers. So we go around the province and we identify the players, put them on scholarships in the local schools that are decent. And then after that, now we build it around that, you know. So we put them in the school where they're going to stay in the hostel, eat reasonable nutrition compared to what they are eating at home. But then we have a life skills program. So after we train you cricket for that 2 hours, you have a lunch, and then after lunch, you come for a life skills class. So we design a curriculum. You learn about values, self-esteem, goal setting, the importance of problem solving, staying calm, emotional intelligence, those kind of stuff. So I wanted to build players who, anywhere they go in the world, people must feel like, wow, this is somebody who's an asset. It's not just somebody who's tolerated. You understand? So that was my mission and my vision. And ironically, I'm doing it now here in the Bahamas. And it's taking off very nicely for the young people, you know. They're starting to get better grades at school. They're starting to talk differently. One of them, I got them to really scream at me. They spoke very like, "Hi, sir, blah, blah, blah." And I said, scream at me. And they were too shy. They couldn't. I said, scream at me. They couldn't. Eventually, they went, ah, they screamed at me. And I said, yes. How did that make you feel? And I said, wow, I feel powerful. And I said, yes, in future, it doesn't matter whether somebody's got a different accent from you, somebody's got a different job title, somebody's wearing a suit and tie, somebody's the president of the country. When you speak with confidence, project your voice, you know. So that really empowered them. The way they conduct themselves, the way they speak to the media is different. So I wanted to do that so that I can build people who are an asset. Because cricket doesn't only need players. It's going to need good CEOs. It's going to need good cricket services managers, good coaches, everything, good commentators, that kind of stuff. So in South Africa, out of fear, we want to keep those circles small so that it's the same guy who's the head coach of a team, but the same guy is also the commentator. And then the same guy is also a consultant when there's a CSA camp. So we're not opening up. On that merry-go-round, it's the same people. Even we see it with the players. This player goes to this province, he averages 25 with a bat, then he moves from there to another province in Division B, does reasonably well, then he gets signed into Division A, struggles a bit, goes back to another province, it's the same thing. So we've kept things small, and it reflects that thing I spoke about, that even economically, those who are earning more than 6,000 Rand is a small number of people, very, very small. And that's why as a country, we need to think about love and expanding energy that says, look, we love our country, and therefore we don't want to see our people struggling. So let's make this pie bigger. Let's get more people on the merry-go-round. Let's empower people, you know. So that's my way of thinking.
Yeah, I appreciate you for being here. Hey, Russel, I just want to check, have you got anything else to add?
I just wanted to say, I think we had too little time. It feels like we missed out on so much more that we could have discussed. It went so quickly. It was powerful. So I'm hoping we can do this again at some point. But it was beautiful. Thanks for that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being another voice in this conversation, right? And it's an open invite to anybody else that feels like they can contribute to this conversation in particular. This idea of how we're building the South African cricketing community, and how do we create excellence for everybody within that, no matter where they come from, right? We're not going to solve all of our country's problems. There will always be the haves and the have-nots, you know, to a certain extent. They will all, because some people are driven and motivated to be haves, and some people are not driven to be that, you know, and some people are happy with just a sort of somewhere middle of the pack. But it doesn't mean that from a cricketing point of view that we should treat it in the same way, you know. Yeah, and I appreciate sort of what you bring to the conversation and what you've added into our dialogue, right? And I'm very appreciative for having these conversations, because I feel like I got a huge sort of thing for myself out of it at this point in time already. So, Russel, thank you for you. Also, as always, yeah, let the conversations continue, and hopefully we can have another one soon. And the invite's open to bring anybody else on that feel like they can contribute to this conversation too. Cool. Awesome.
Thanks a lot, gents. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yes, thanks. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, gents. Cheers. Bye.